A certain name once carried real significance in this country. It was tied to the land itself and connected to a legacy built slowly over time. That name belonged to a family whose history stretched across 3 difficult generations that had built something meaningful from almost nothing. They were known as the Guthrie family. Many people may never have heard their story, but anyone who had sat inside the courtroom where their legal battles unfolded would never forget it. Over years of quiet disputes, buried resentments, and hidden truths, the family's history slowly came apart piece by piece. Woodrow Guthrie Sr. had built a ranching empire in rural Montana through relentless work. He raised 4 children and drafted a will that everyone assumed they understood. When he eventually passed away, the family believed they knew how his estate would be divided. That assumption proved completely wrong. When the legal process finally concluded, when every document had been examined and every lawyer had finished their work, and when the family had stopped speaking to each other entirely, the results stunned everyone. Only a single person inherited everything. The estate was not split between siblings, nor divided in any way that anyone had predicted. One individual alone walked away with the entire legacy. The path that led to that outcome involved private meetings, disputed documents, a child whose existence had been kept hidden, and even a letter tucked inside a Bible that had remained unopened for 3 decades. The case became one of the most quietly devastating inheritance disputes in modern American family history. Yet the conflict was never truly about money. At its core, the story was about withheld affection, about memory and erasure, and about the meaning behind a dying man's final decision when he deliberately chose that only one person should inherit everything he had spent his life building. Nothing about the story is as simple as it first appears. To understand what happened to the Guthrie estate, it is necessary to look closely at Woodrow Guthrie Sr. himself. Not the polished version of him that appeared on plaques or in stories told after his death, but the real man with all his complexities and contradictions. He lived for 81 years and left his mark in many ways. Some of those marks were carved into the soil he worked, others into the hearts of the people who knew him, and still others would take years to fully emerge. Woodrow was born in 1941 in a modest 2-room house near Billings, Montana. His father worked on the railroad, while his mother earned money by taking laundry and maintaining an enormous vegetable garden that neighbors jokingly said could feed the entire county. The family had little money and lived modestly, but they possessed a deep sense of pride. That pride, stubborn, determined, and unwilling to be defeated, became the most valuable inheritance Woodrow ever received. By the age of 23, he had gathered enough money to lease 30 acres of land. At 30, he owned that land outright. By the time he reached 45, he had expanded the property to more than 400 acres, developed a thriving cattle operation, secured contracts with regional distributors, and built a substantial home overlooking the land where his efforts had begun. The house included a wraparound porch and a stone fireplace, and stood as a symbol of the life he had constructed from nothing. In 1966, he married Margaret Elaine Hooper, a quiet school teacher known for her patience and a laugh so joyful that people claimed could be heard from rooms away. Together they raised 3 children, Woodrow Jr., who was commonly called Dell Thomas, and their daughter Patricia. From the outside, the Guthrie household appeared to embody the ideal of the American dream. Yet beneath that pleasant image lay tensions that few outsiders ever noticed. Margaret passed away in 2003, and her death deeply affected Woodrow. Afterward, he became more reserved and emotionally distant. He continued working the ranch because it was the language he understood best, but something inside him had shifted. His children sensed the change even if they could not describe it. What they did not know was that during this period their father had quietly begun contacting someone who had long remained outside the family's story. That hidden connection would eventually transform everything they believed about their father and about their inheritance. The first indication that something unusual was happening appeared in the summer of 2019, 2 years before Woodrow died. Dell, the eldest son who had remained closest to the ranch, noticed that his father had begun meeting with a new lawyer in Billings. The attorney was not the longtime family lawyer Franklin Morse, but a younger specialist whose practice focused on estate restructuring and contested inheritance cases. Dell mentioned the meetings to Thomas during a phone call. Thomas, who lived in Seattle and operated a consulting business, dismissed the concern and suggested their father was probably revising his will as he had done periodically in the past. Patricia, when contacted by text message, responded with a single word: "Fine." Yet Dell remained uneasy. He had observed subtle changes in his father's behavior, including moments when Woodrow seemed lost in thought, unexplained certified letters that quickly disappeared into a desk drawer, and once a name flashing on a phone screen that Woodrow turned away before it could be read. Dell chose not to question him directly, following the family's unspoken rule of restraint. That silence would later prove costly. Woodrow Guthrie Sr. died on March 4, 2021, at 6:42 in the morning in the bedroom of the home he had built decades earlier. Dell was present at the time. Thomas had flown in 2 days before, and Patricia arrived 4 hours after the death, having driven overnight from Missoula, where she worked as a high school English teacher. The funeral was modest, exactly as Woodrow had requested. A small service took place at the local Methodist church, followed by a burial on the ranch near a grove of cottonwood trees where he had always enjoyed his morning coffee. Afterward, friends, neighbors, ranch workers, and longtime acquaintances gathered at the house to remember him. 3 hours after the burial, during that gathering, Franklin Morse quietly pulled Dell aside. He explained that there was something important Dell needed to know before the official reading of the will. According to Franklin, Woodrow had visited him the previous year to inform him of another document, a codicil that had been filed independently. Although Franklin had advised against the change, Woodrow had chosen to proceed anyway. Dell asked what the codicil applied to, and Franklin hesitated before answering. After decades of delivering difficult legal news, Franklin's pause suggested that this situation was different. The codicil, he explained, modified the will that had originally divided the estate equally among the 3 children. The new document altered everything. The formal reading of the will occurred 6 days after the funeral in Franklin Morse's office on a gloomy Tuesday morning. Dell arrived first. Thomas entered soon afterward with his wife Evelina Guthrie, whose presence created a subtle tension because Dell and Patricia still regarded her as an outsider during family matters. Patricia arrived last, spoke to no one, and sat silently at the far end of the table. Franklin began by presenting the original will. It divided the ranch land, equipment, livestock contracts, and financial assets, valued at over $3 million, equally among the 3 siblings. This arrangement matched what their father had described years earlier. Then Franklin placed a second document on the table. The codicil had been signed 14 months before Woodrow's death. It had been properly witnessed, notarized, and filed according to Montana law, leaving no procedural grounds for challenge. The document replaced the earlier will entirely and transferred every asset, the land, the house, the accounts, and the business interests, to a single individual. That individual was not Dell, Thomas, or Patricia. Her name was Caroline Renee Guthrie. Caroline was 34 years old and had been raised in Spokane, Washington by her mother, Diane Vasquez, who had once worked at a feed supply company in Billings where Woodrow had been a regular client decades earlier. The implication was immediate. Caroline was Woodrow's biological daughter, a fact confirmed through a paternity test he had arranged privately in 2018. The DNA report was included in the estate file, leaving no uncertainty. The reaction inside the conference room was not explosive, but eerily silent. The siblings realized that their family history had just been rewritten. Dell later said he felt as though he might lose his balance even while sitting down. Thomas remained motionless, and Patricia simply turned toward the window and stared outside for a long time. Legal disputes followed soon afterward. Dell filed a lawsuit claiming undue influence and diminished capacity, arguing that Caroline had manipulated their elderly father or that Woodrow had not been mentally competent when the codicil was drafted. Both arguments encountered strong evidence against them. Medical records confirmed Woodrow remained mentally sharp, and his physician, Dr. Nita Romero, submitted a statement supporting the conclusion. The lawyer who drafted the codicil, Seth Crawford, had carefully documented every meeting with Woodrow and confirmed that the decision had been deliberate and firmly expressed. The evidence suggested that Woodrow had acted entirely on his own judgment. 7 months after Woodrow's death, a ranch worker named Gerald Prout discovered a letter while cleaning the study. The letter had been hidden inside Margaret's old Bible and addressed to Dell, Thomas, and Patricia. It held no legal authority but offered a personal explanation. According to portions later shared publicly by Patricia, the letter revealed that Woodrow had known about Caroline for many years. He had kept the secret to protect his marriage and later to protect his children's memories of their mother. The inheritance, he wrote, was not meant as punishment but as repayment for a debt he felt he owed to the daughter who had grown up without him. Caroline herself had known little about her father until adulthood. Her mother had told her only that he was a rancher in Montana and that he had chosen his existing family over acknowledging her publicly. Woodrow eventually hired a private investigator to find her and wrote a letter asking to meet. Their first meeting took place at a diner in Spokane in 2018 after he drove 14 hours to get there. Over the following 2 years, they slowly formed a relationship. Caroline never sought publicity and did not attend the legal hearings. She issued only a brief written statement acknowledging the inheritance and promising to care for the land. Dell's lawsuit was dismissed in February 2022. Thomas eventually withdrew his own legal challenge after accepting a symbolic settlement offered voluntarily by Caroline. Patricia had never contested the will at all. When asked why, she explained that after reading their father's letter, she understood the reason behind his decision. By the spring of 2022, Caroline moved to the ranch. 2 years later, on a quiet morning in 2023, she stood on the porch of the house Woodrow had built and watched the sunrise across the 400 acres that now belonged to her. The Guthrie story does not present a simple moral. It is neither a tale of greed nor a straightforward conflict over wealth. Instead, it reflects the complicated consequences of secrets and the emotional debts people accumulate through silence. Woodrow loved his children, yet he also failed them in important ways. Both realities exist side by side. Ultimately, he chose to address decades of silence through the only mechanism available to him, his will. In death, he gave Caroline what he had never provided during her childhood: his name, recognition, and a place within the family story. Whether that act represented justice or merely the complicated calculations of a man trying to reconcile his past is something each listener must decide for themselves. If stories like this provoke reflection, if they remind you of the unspoken truths hidden inside many families, they matter because they are not rare. In different forms, they exist everywhere.